Thank you for coming back. I was kind of afraid you might run off there, but it seems like you're sticking into it. So let's get into it and talk a little bit more about Chapter 2. We're going to start off by talking about displaying multiple items within the print function. Python does allow one to display multiple items with a single call to the print statement. Items are separated by commas when passed as arguments. Arguments displayed in the order they are passed to the function. And items are automatically separated by a space when displayed on the screen. So when we call print, we can pass multiple things. Separate by comma. Aw, thank you. I know. So, in this case, it's going to put all three items out to the screen. And in this case, because we have these commas and we're separating, it's going to put a space for us in between. So now, when it outputs, you're going to see Mike space is space amazing. There it is. Aw, again. Now, we talked about how we assign variables. We can also reassign them. Variables can reference different values while a program is running. A little tidbit for you. There's this thing called garbage collection, and that is when we are no longer using values. As in, we have, let's say, remember before we had my var and I had assigned it something? Well, now if I come along and reassign it, what we originally assigned it up here, that data, this data right here, this Mike data, the garbage collector is going to come along and it's going to remove the values that are no longer referenced by variables. Because I've re-referenced it to this new variable, this new data, the Mike up above is no longer being referenced. So the garbage collector is going to come along and get rid of it. And this is carried out by the Python interpreter for us. A variable can refer to items of any type. So if you have a variable that has been assigned to one type, like before we had it assigned to a string. So this is a string. And then we reassign it to another string. But if I come along and say my var equals 10, it knows to change my var now behind the scenes to a type of an integer. By the way, when we assign integers to variables, we don't put single quotes around them. If we were to put a single quote around 10, then my var would be of type string, and it would not be a number. It would actually be the string literal 10. So numeric data types, literals, and the string data type. Data types are how we categorize what the value is in memory. So in memory, we can have int, which stands for integers. We can have floats, which stands for real numbers. str, which is storing strings in memory. A numeric literal is a number written in program. No decimal point considered is considered an int. Otherwise, it's considered a float. So anytime we have 10, 20, this, because it doesn't have a decimal, is going to be considered an int. However, if it does have a decimal, these are considered floats. And that's because our decimal is considered a floating decimal. It can be anywhere in our number. Some operations behave different depending on the data type. So, when reassigning a variable to a different type, a variable in Python can refer to items of any type. So here they're saying we're assigning x originally to 99, or in fact we're actually saying, we should say it the opposite, 99 is being assigned to the variable x, which by the way we know that x is not a good variable name, and if we use x except in certain circumstances which are in later chapters, we probably lose some points on the assignment, so don't do that. But in this case, we're just talking about this x, and after it was used as 99, they reassigned it to the phrase, take me to your leader. So originally x was an int, because 99 is a number with no decimal, no decimal, so it's an int. And then it was reassigned to a string. Now, remember we talked about print. Now, print is a function with a parameter that when we pass data in the parameter, it's what gets outputted by the print function. We're going to talk about another function now, and that is the input function. So when we use the input function, we're asking our computer to get input from the user, from the keyboard. And whatever comes in, we need to store it in a variable. Otherwise, we get lost. The prompt is what do we say to the customer, letting them know that we're waiting for input. So a prompt is typically a string instruction user to enter a value. Now, it does not automatically display a space after the prompt. So whatever your prompt is, if you don't put a space after the prompt, Python won't either. So you either want to put something like enter a number, and put a space at the end, so that way when it comes up and asks the user, it's not what they type doesn't butt up right against the input. Oftentimes, I like to instead also say input a number, question mark, space, and then quote, or sometimes I get a little fancier and I say input a number, colon, space, and then in parentheses, not parentheses, in our single quote. When we want to read numbers with input function, we got to first understand that the input function, and remember we said up here, we always have to assign what's coming from the input into a variable. It's always going to read whatever comes from the keyboard as a string. So even if the user types 10, by the way, as a programmers, we like to put a line through 0 so you know that we're talking about 0 and not the letter O. When we type that in, it's actually coming back into our variable as a string. So to convert this to an integer, we utilize int, which converts whatever is inside of here into a number and assigns it to a variable. If we want a float instead, we use float to do it. And by the way, oftentimes when we're doing this, we're going to nest a function. So as you can see, function 2 utilizes argument. And whatever function 2 returns is going to be the argument for function 1. Our function functions always work from the innermost to the outermost. So that's why function 2 here goes first, then function 1. So why do we want to do that? Or why do we even talk about that at this moment? And that's because here we could say input your age. We're going to put that space there, right? So we know there's a space there. We don't need to have this anymore. And remember, we need to normally assign this to a variable, but when they type in whatever their age is, it's going to come in as a string, and we really need it as an int. So we can go ahead and put parentheses around this and say int. So whatever they type in is going to then be passed into the int function, and this can then be assigned to age. So this first bit now, this what's coming in here is going to be a string passed to an int. This is going to return an int into age. On our next video, we're going to move from input to start doing some processing on our input. And we're going to do that first by talking about performing calculations. I'll see you next time.